Hi, this is Siofra Bradigan, and this is Siofra's Magic Alcove. So, some of you asked me to put together a video on the subject of how to work with deity versus worshiping deity. Because I mentioned that one of the things that witches and pagans in general are known for is not being under a god or goddess form, but being beside and with a god or goddess form. So, as usual, everything has got all sorts of things running through it. Um, well, first, your first question is going to be, what god or goddess should I be trying to develop a relationship with? And that is not something that can be answered readily because there's a lot to choose from. It's going to depend upon where you're at. You can work with one god or goddess at this point in your path and then end up working with a different one later on. It's not like it has to be an eternal relationships. It's so the ways you can sort of decide, there's a couple of different ways to try and decide who to work with. One is research, doing a lot of research into different mythologies and see if there's a story or a personality or something that resonates with you that you want to further explore. Um, or contrarily, something that makes you uncomfortable that you think would be a good idea for you to work through. Because working with these forces can help clear things out for you, um, and help you face your fears and anxieties as well as get other kinds of productive work done. So for me, probably my first deity that I started working with was Aphrodite when I was introduced to her story in the fourth grade and had my mind opened to the possibility that people believed different things at different times in history and in different places, which I hadn't known until then because it wasn't a subject that was part of my household upbringing. I was raised Methodist. We went to church. I was exposed to Bible stories, Sunday school, and that kind of thing. And no one in that environment ever mentioned that there had been or might still be other types of deities out there to be introduced to and explore. So I'm kind of lucky, I think, that it happened when I was that age because my mind was still fairly flexible and malleable. I wasn't quite as rigid as some people are when they first start on the path because they've gotten a lot more years under their belt of following a strict set of principles and beliefs, a structured belief system that requires certain actions and and whatnot for them to take in order to be worthy or comply with the rules of said organization or group. And there certainly are plenty of them around. And even in the pagan community at large, there are plenty of groups that are fairly structured and strict about how and when and who and with whom and so forth you can do certain things. So being an eclectic and not being absorbed into any one of them specifically, I think has allowed me a freedom to think about and explore things that might not be as easy for other people. So, since I was in the fourth grade, which would put me around, what, 10 years old, maybe, I think, somewhere around then, 9 or 10, first grade is 6, 7, 8, yeah, between, going, starting at 9 and going through to 10 since I was born in January. Um, as far as how old I was at the time. And I just like immediately absorbed and accepted the whole notion because there it was. Other people had been different, and that meant that if it had been different before, then it could be different again. And so what I was currently doing didn't seem the only way to do things. And I think that, weirdly enough, even though I was raised Methodist, I apparently remembered being a Catholic because I said the rosary. I prayed to the Virgin Mary all the time. She could potentially be actually an earlier goddess than Aphrodite. Because really, when it comes to stories and so forth, the Virgin Mary and all the things that supposedly she did and happened to her, etc., are very much like a lot of other goddess stories and myths that are out there. And I felt that she would understand me better because she was a girl and Jesus was not. And so I prayed to her and tried to develop some kind of rapport with her, figuring, not incorrectly, that there would be more empathy for my plight as a girl and might be more useful to me. So without realizing it, I already was doing more of a choosing a deity kind of thing to work with and to learn from. Um, but then Aphrodite supplanted her pretty quickly. And they were both goddess forms. So I was clearly attracted to the idea of finding some kind of a female role model that would help me to understand the world a bit better and to work in the world better. My mother was not a very good role model for being a woman because, um, well, she was in an extremely unhealthy relationship with my father. She was abused on a regular basis, verbally abused, and on occasion physically abused as well. She didn't model mother behavior because she was sort of punished whenever she tried to protect us in the beginning, and then forced to watch us be tortured, which was a way of training her out of acting out and, trying to protect us. So she learned how to turn that part of her off completely, in a sense, to try and protect us, which I can understand, but it wasn't much of a role model for me to follow, not one I really wanted to follow. Um, and certainly, as a young girl, there wasn't much out there in 1959, 1960, would be when I was 9 and 10 years old. So that in itself was kind of a remarkable feat that I started looking at a goddess, a Greek goddess, and we had a collection, like a 10-volume encyclopedia of fairy tales around the world, and I devoured that. I mean, I absolutely, from one book through the entire set of volumes, I devoured every story that was in there. And I'm sure the same kind of thing, looking for something. Um, and there's no doubt in my mind that Aphrodite took me under her wing, um, and was there for me and with me. I didn't have specific rites or prayers or anything that I did, except for reading and, studying the mythology and so forth. Not just hers, but other Greek mythology was my first introduction to the whole thing. But she certainly made herself known that she was into it, into having a relationship. When I needed to change everything, um, when I suddenly woke up one day and realized that being a legal secretary was really not what I was meant to do, and wasn't very fulfilling, always typing up other people's thoughts and, you know, and whatnot. And at that moment, I decided when I suddenly realized I should go to school to become a massage therapist, I thought, okay, in order to do this, I picked a school that was 75 miles away from me because they had a 500-hour program, which was more than the bare minimum in California, which was only 100 hours. And I'd already seen several people go through the beginning 100-hour coursework, and they didn't seem to know what they were doing. And my personality is such, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it well or not bother at all. So I really needed to have a um, a job with that paid well and had full-time benefits because I had two children to take care of, so I needed medical and flexible hours since I had to travel the 150 miles there and back 3 days a week to go to school for 9 months. And so roses are definitely one of the flowers that's clearly associated with Aphrodite. And I was I found a job opening with the bus company, the Transit Authority in Santa Cruz, and the first set of exams, I made arrangements to go there by bus, and on my way there on the bus, a stranger came up to me and handed me a rose. This to me was a message from Aphrodite saying, this job is yours, you've got this job. And so I was relaxed and felt comfortable. I knew that I had this job, even though there were 50 other applicants. And it was like a large room of people typing and, doing the grammar and whatnot, filing, how to do it, etc. And so it took a while after I had that test to get called back. And then I was called into a panel interview with 3 interviewers, which was something I'd never done before. So I was a little bit nervous about it. And I was working as a temp, and I was at the local community college south of town, and I was getting ready to leave to go to the interview, and a different person, again, a male stranger, walked up and handed me a rose as I was getting ready to leave to go to the interview, which was very surprising and encouraging. And so again, I knew this job was mine, and I went through the process of going and answering all the questions and everything. I had the rose with me on the interview desk where I was sitting or what have you. And then on my way out, I was inspired to pass the rose on to one of the 3 women that interviewed me. And I just said, here, this is for you, because it just seemed like the right thing to do. And so then I got the call to go to the 3rd interview, which was the in-person at the Transit Authority with the administrator, the head of the administration department, which is the job I was applying for. And at that point, roses had become a thing, and so I picked a rose from our own rose garden that we had at the house, and I brought it with me, and I arrived, and the woman I had given that rose to at the previous interview was there at the last interview. And me having the rose immediately made her remember me, and she asked me what it was about me and all these roses, and I says, people started handing me roses when I applied for this job, and I just felt I needed to keep on doing it because it became a thing. And so I had adopted the rose as the symbol. It was clear it was Aphrodite because this was her symbol, and I was acknowledging the fact that it was also part of my own power. I didn't have to wait or expect the universe to give me that 3rd rose. It was okay for me to take it myself. And so that's like an acknowledgement of your own power when you do that. And so it's an example of not being under and supplicating the deity and asking for assistance and stuff like that. It was like accepting the assistance that she offered and then bringing my own power to the table and knowing that this job was mine because I was actually qualified for it and I needed it and the universe was going to let it happen. So after I got the job, I actually kept a rose on my desk as a thank you for the whole time I worked there. And it didn't have to be like some serious thing where I had to say a prayer every day or a poem or do a specific ritual in order to develop a relationship with this goddess form. It was just there it was. I acknowledged and accepted it and I went with it. And I'm sure that that has something to do with how Ian and I ended up together because I found the perfect partner. It just took a little longer than I would have hoped, but that was the first step towards meeting Ian because that job got me my massage license. My massage license had me move first to Northern California and then to Southern Oregon, and it was after my husband at the time deserted or left me to go on his own back to California. That was when I met Ian. So I think the whole process was part of her plan, if you want to call it that, to get me to a good person, someone who was worthy of my respect and on all the other things I went through in the process that made me ready for being in a healthy relationship. So when Ian and I got married, I chose May 23rd because it's the Festival of the Rose and it's sacred to Aphrodite. And there's huge festivals around the world sacred to Aphrodite, Ishtar, and probably Venus, I'm sure, as the Roman equivalent of Aphrodite. But I chose that particular day on purpose because of its name, Festival of the Rose, and its association with the goddesses of love. And I had roses at my wedding. And so roses have always been like one of those symbols that have been around me from time to time. And certainly she's not the only deity I've had a relationship with, but it's like to try and explain how that happens. I mean, how do you explain how that happens? It's a lot of it had to do with my attitude and my acceptance of that. Another way you can help attune yourself to different deities, we did that in the group I was in Santa Cruz. The women picked a goddess name, the men picked a god name, although it doesn't have to be that way. In this case, it was. And I picked Ishtar, and so people called me Ishtar, and everyone had their own god and goddess name, and we went by that when we were doing ritual and so forth. And that is another way to help attune yourself to a specific thread of energy. And so sometimes the gods and the goddesses pick you, sometimes you pick them. There's no one way of doing this. It's like everything else in the universe, it's all going to be individual. But there's no supplication required to work with most of these gods and goddesses. And part of that lies with the attitude of the practitioner. But that would be the more common pagan attitude towards the gods. It's like they have their role, we have ours. Free will is an important process of our evolution, and you don't have to work with any deity you don't feel comfortable with working. You can sever the relationship. I did that with Jehovah when I was like, I think about 14, maybe. Um, I had sort of an epiphany at that point, and because certainly Jehovah, Yahweh, whatever, is one of the God forms that really likes having energy put in his direction and being over his followers rather than side by side with his followers. And I just had this sudden epiphany that um, people's prayers were as important to him. It's like feeding the energy to him, and that it wasn't that important to me, and that in that regard, he needed me more than I needed him. And so, because the relationship had gotten out of sync, um, I declared I was done and wasn't a part of his flock anymore and not interested in any of the things he might want to be interested in having me do. It was like, okay, not doing that. But again, free will, and it's an important thing. So the communions, and by communion I mean the ability to sit still within yourself and feel the and share the energy of something greater than you or outside of yourself, that I've had with different deities has been certainly educational and interesting and important in that sense to me. So so you can choose them, they can choose you, and in the instances where they choose you, you still have free will and you can always decide this isn't working for you right now. You don't feel comfortable with it, you're not able to go through whatever shadow work might be necessary in order to make the relationship healthy. That's another factor, there's no doubt. So when I went to Starhawk's workshop and I was laying there in, on the bunk bed, and suddenly Argus appeared out of nowhere and looked at me, inside of me, everywhere inside of me. That was startling, but it didn't seem like he was wanting a relationship. He was just sort of checking me out. And I don't think I would want a consistent relationship with Argus because it is kind of hard to maintain that level of transparency all the time. But it's very educational for sure. So, because of my relationships with my father and how he treated us, certainly Jehovah Yahweh was a representation of that kind of father energy in my mind, subconscious, unconscious, what have you, which was another reason to decide to sever ties with that specific energy. And I went and I delved into just the goddess energies, trying to find a good female form to help me grow as a woman, because that's where I was at. And, encountering the goddesses of the moon, Artemis became one of my goddesses for, and still is, for quite a while. And so doing those rituals, the drawing down the moon, feeling the goddess energy appear, coming in, meditationally speaking, doing sacred baths, letting the goddess energy enter into my body, and sharing my space, my mind, my heart, my energy with that specific kind of energy for a period of time was part of growth and healing and everything else. So um, that's one of the ways that we attune ourselves to specific energies. So for a long time, it was all goddesses. I didn't feel very comfortable with most of the God forms, although the first God form that I think I really connected with was Pan and Kerninos, when I was reprogramming my unconscious and getting rid of the last vestiges of the religious programming that I'd gone through as a child. When I lived up north, I was starting to have a lot of dreams where I would discover where my unconscious was at. And when I began dreaming about the god, Pan and Kerninos, in his marvelous, sensual, self, attractive energy, kind of magnetic kind of energy, um, and and Christians would show up in my dreams, and I was able to just tell them to go away and leave me alone. I was pretty confident that I was succeeding. So, dream work is also one of the ways that you can do this. So I did connect with him, and then in Santa Cruz, I also met Anubis, and Anubis came to me in a dream. I did not know Anubis at the time. I mean, I'm sure I'd taken some Egyptian mythology way back in school or something, but it certainly had not been one of the impactful mythologies in particular that I was like about all the time. But I met Anubis in the dream state, and Anubis actually had me sit on his lap and go to sleep in the dream to take me into the underworld. So I know that there's a strong connection between me and Anubis. And around that time, I started to remember my life with Isis, as a priestess Isis, my Egyptian connections and so forth. So that's another way that these things can sort of be reactivated from previous lives. And you start remembering things from other lifetimes that you've been here, or you've already made a strong connection. And I remember a connection very vividly with Aphrodite as a priestess for her, and with Isis, um, and other kinds of things. So, that's all in there in my greater memory of other places and other times, and the deities tend to activate those centers in me, and help me learn that way. Um, and around that time, I I got into Kali, because one of the things I wanted and needed to learn, and had started to learn when I was up north, about trying to be a good mother, a strong female, looking into the darker side of things, and being comfortable with the darker side of things. Like when I was gardening and so forth, I felt like I was the goddess of chaos and destruction, and actually not chaos, just destruction. I was pulling out weeds and leaving the plants I wanted, and sort of tuning into that kind of energy and understanding it on a more cellular level. There's a tongue twister. So, um, so there was that. I'm trying to think back. It's like there actually were a fair number of different deities that I made connections with early on that I thought I hadn't until I started thinking about it. So they're still there. And but yeah, Kali was important for the powerful female um, energy, because I hadn't yet discovered the Celtic goddesses, who have a lot of that. They have a lot of definitely in your face goddesses that aren't shy about what's going on and what they want, and that kind of thing, in their power for sure. So, um, I found some good books on Kali, read up on her, meditated on her. A friend of my son's at the time was making a trip with his mother to India, and asked if there was anything I'd like him to bring back, and I asked him to bring me back a statue of Kali from India, and pick it out himself, and bring it back with him, which he did. So that had more significance to me than just something I might pick up at a local shop here or anywhere where I was at the time. And he did. He brought it back, and that is my Kali statue that I still have. And so Each of the deities has sort of got an alignment with different kinds of forces and energies, different aspects of creation and chaos and destruction and, magic and power. And so, that's one of the things I like about paganism. If this one doesn't work for you, there's 30 others that might fit the bill and fit it better and be more appropriate for what you're going through that you can learn from. Even if you think of them as archetypes and not as actual um, external beings that are alive in their own right, it still works for that as the idea of an archetype, helping you get in touch with certain aspects of personality and history and human consciousness and unconscious energies and so forth. So you don't have to actually literally believe in them as external forces in order to work with their energies. Um, I don't think you do anyway. So uh, after we moved here, um, the first God form that actually came to me to develop a relationship was the Garuda. And it started off in a magic shop in Roseburg or Grants Pass. Grants Pass, I think. I can't remember. I don't remember what city it was in now. But anyway, we were in their store and I saw the Garuda statue, and there was just something about it that spoke to me. I didn't know anything about him, but there was something about his statue that just pleased me. It was, and so then I started doing research to find out more about him, and he seemed perfectly appropriate, protecting his followers and that sort of thing, and being able to take his followers on trips on his giant wings through the ether and whatnot. And so he came home with me, and it was a slow evolution. It's like any kind of a relationship that you have in life. When you first meet somebody, you might be seriously interested in them, but they may not be in the right frame of mind to get a new friend, or you're just not quite what they're looking for right then. But then after they know you for a period of time, casual conversation, or seeing people out in public or in different environments and so forth, and things shift, then suddenly you might be developing a closer friendship. And even with close friendships, it's that continuation of attention, time spent together, doing little things, and it evolves into something deeper. And it's no different with developing a relationship with a god or a goddess. It's like there is always that. It's not an instantaneous kind of thing. So Garuda was here. He was happy in our temple, just hanging out. And then we had that strange crisis that happened with everybody freaking out about us and deciding to attack us, and decided we needed some assistance. And Garuda just basically like put his hand up and said, "Me, pick me." And I thought about it and I thought, okay, he's willing. And that in itself is an interesting experience because he wanted to help us. So hanging out in our temple, watching us, what we were doing, being acquainted with our energy and so forth, he liked us and we liked him. And so it was a mutually beneficial relationship. And he liked us so much, they actually gave us a special chant just for us to do, to call on him for protection. And so there's another relationship that I have with the deity. And having more than one relationship doesn't mean that you're a more powerful pagan or witch or anything. I don't think. It just means that, you've evolved, and I definitely still have a relationship with the other gods and goddesses that I've developed compatibility with and for and so forth. Um, when I lived up north, I started being tapped by Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, And of course, the aurora borealis and so forth was very powerful up there, which made me inclined to sense Aurora, the goddess, I think. Um, and so she's become, I guess, sort of what they call a matron goddess. She's kind of like a core goddess. She's just there. And it suits me. It's helpful for me. I do have a poem I found that I really liked a lot that I learned that I say to her not every single day, but often when I think of it, I recite the poem, and it kind of sets the tone for the day, makes me feel hopeful, helps me to let go of things I can't control, and realize that every day that I wake up, it's a new dawn. There's new possibilities. There's hope. Um, there's beauty. There's joy, love in the world if I'm only open enough to notice it, see it, embrace it. Um, so she has been a good goddess for that. And who knows, like, as I evolve more, other goddesses will come into play. Certainly, Bridget is an important goddess to me at this point, too. And I like her because she is both fiery and watery. She is feminine and creative and is a poet. And so she's very good for the arts and creativity and so forth. She's also strong, powerful, a warrior, makes weapons as well as oxen shoes, knows how to take metal and base metal and turn it into something completely different than what it started out as. So she's like an alchemist, being able to shape and form things out of one thing and turning them into something else. Um, I think she's a good goddess for our time, for women who are trying to figure out what kind of balance they want to have in their lives. Um, and how, we don't have to be one thing or another. We can be all things. It doesn't have to be you're just feminine or you're powerful. You can be both feminine and powerful if you want or not. It's like gives us more emotional choices, I think, from a archetype point of view. Certainly that's the reason why I did the beaded piece of her. And she's now in my room. And my Irish heritage certainly relates to her. And she's probably about the best known goddess on the planet, I think. More people recognize her name than just about anything else, um, at least of that particular pantheon. Not as many people recognize Danu or what have you. And because of the relationship with her, I started to develop a relationship with her father, the Dagda, and he was the first god form that was a father figure type that I actually liked and felt right, considering my lack of having a good father in this life. Um, the Dagda embodies all the things that my father didn't have, embodies the protectiveness, the nurturing, the feeding of the people, provider kind of thing, but also, again, a poet, uh, sings the songs that bring the seasons into existence. So, again, not a single minded, one faceted kind of deity, but a very complex, multifaceted being in his own right. And certainly, he was the first true God form that I thought as a father figure that I could relate to and felt comfortable with. I don't know that that would have worked when I first felt comfortable with Pan and Kerninos. I was in a completely different state at that time, in a different stage of my development. And that's the thing, we go through all these different phases and stages and so forth. So, sometimes people feel they need to give offerings to the gods that they're working with. And that can be fine. Like I often put roses on Aphrodite's statue. I found I got some emerald beads to make an emerald necklace for her to put on the statue because Venus, the planet, emerald is the stone, and it makes sense finding out what it is that they represent and then surrounding them with that. There's different deities that you can get involved with that are much more um, picky about what you can and can't do with them, like in Santeria and Voodoo. Uh, a lot of their deities, if you don't do things just right, you can get into trouble. I stay away from them for that reason because I'm sometimes forgetful. And I really don't want to set myself up for, smacked for being, forgetting to feed them or something. And again, personal choice. Some people might want to have the consistent need to honor a deity a specific way every day or once a month or on their special day or what have you. Like I said, there's all kinds of different ways of doing this. And that's the thing about the path is it's kind of like we're all different people. We have different body chemistry. We have different things that are good for our body, different things that are bad for our body. Some of us are allergic to things that are great for other people, but for us might kill us. And these are clues that we're different and not one thing fits all. Just because we all are wearing the same basic genetic material doesn't mean that there isn't a huge variety in our genetics. And so getting to know who we are versus who we think we ought to be is rather important for both our physical, mental, and emotional health as well as our spiritual health. They all kind of go together. So if you find yourself in a wonderful, powerful relationship with a deity and you're just way, way excited about it, that's good. Good to be excited about it. But that doesn't mean that someone who is working with a different set of deities is got it wrong. It's not a competition as who can get the right one. It's like a buffet. There's lots to choose from, and you can pick and choose what works for you if you're eclectic like me. Um, and you find your own personal aesthetic and what is the way to work with that particular energy that works best for you. Life is all about balance and moderation and time, and it takes time to develop relationships. They're generally not instantaneous, although on occasion people can have that kind of an experience. It's rare rather than common. And yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Like, I know it sounds sort of vaguish, but that's because it's a personal relationship between you and some specific energy that you're trying to connect with. And there's so many different kinds. Okay, so I guess I'll end it now. And I'm curious about what sort of questions you might come up with. So this is Siofra Bradigan, and this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.